Congressman Glenn Ivey, representing Maryland's 4th District, joins me here on the program live from Chicago. Good to see you, Congressman.
Thanks for having me on. Good to see you too.
Yeah, likewise. I'm sad that and remiss that I couldn't be out there in Chicago and seeing everybody out there. But I would love to get from you, because in our first segment, we're talking with Jessica Coggins, who's the executive director over at the Texas Signal, about what she's been hearing from, not only delegates, but also some other folks in the Democratic circles world. And now we want to hear from somebody who's an actual member of Congress right now. How has the week been for you? And since the last time we spoke, a lot has changed in American politics. And it just felt like this whirlwind since June 28th, since that post debate to where we are now. What do you make of how your party has regrouped over these last 7-8 weeks?
I don't think there's anything like this in American history. I mean, you're right. The debate debacle, I'll call it, really threw everything up in the air. I thought President Biden, did a good job of recovering from it with his follow-up debates and rallies and the like. But, it really started a downward spiral. So I thought he did the right thing in passing the torch to the vice president. And man, as she hit the ground running, it's been really impressive to see how she's consolidated support. The donations have gone through the roof. And she's been able to draw out more volunteers, which are, I think, outstanding for the standpoint of really energizing our ground game across the country, but especially in battleground states. So it's everything, is hitting on all cylinders, and that's reflected in the week here in Chicago. The convention's been, just one bright spot after another one. The energy, the positivity, the excitement is off the charts. So we're in a great position right now, and all we need to do is sustain it and keep moving forward.
Let me ask you a question before we move forward. Let me move back for a second, because, like I said, a lot has changed since the last time you and I spoke. And I'm curious for you, before the debate and then the lead up subsequent days, weeks after the debate, obviously everyone's trying to get a member of Congress and tie them down on the record of, do they still stand with Biden or would he drop out? But what were you hearing from folks in the DMV, your constituents, and just people you talk to in general outside of the halls of Congress about should he stay or should he go, what the future of the party should look like? Like, what were some of the things that you were hearing? What camp were you in? Because the biggest pushback was always, you don't have enough time to rally around somebody. And now we've seen that there was enough time to rally around somebody. So what do you make of that?
Well, I mean, I think, I was a staunch supporter of President Biden. I thought that he'd done such a great job as president that he has certainly earned the right to run for re-election again. He had the track record of being the only person who's beaten Trump up to this point. I think that's about to change with Vice President Harris, but so far it's still Biden alone who's been able to pull that off. And like I said, he had a bad debate night, but everything else was pretty good. The rallies, the press conferences. He did an hour-and-a-half press conference after the NATO summit that came off great. Didn't get much credit for it because at that point, there was sort of sort of any kind of mistake or any kind of misstep of any kind was really magnified unfairly, I thought. But in any event, the CBC, I think, was pretty much on board with President Biden still. My constituents were certainly there, too, in Prince George's County. But, we had a number of my colleagues start peeling off in the House and the Senate. And donors apparently had raised concerns, too. So that was part of the challenge.
So I do want to pivot off of that, because you just kind of fed into it a little bit of the convention itself and the speeches. And I want to get your opinion on, obviously, who has kind of stood out to you? Who are some figureheads within the party that maybe you heard speak throughout this week? We saw Monday the adulation and support being shown to President Biden, and then obviously the Obamas speaking on Tuesday. We had last night with Governor Walz making an impactful speech. What are some of the things that have kind of stood out to you from all of these speeches this week, and the way the party's been able to bring out, some of the older veterans, let's call it, of the Democratic Party?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly had a strong cast of up and coming stars like Wes Moore, and The Obamas were both here. The Clintons were both here. We've got a real strong, historical track record as well. So, the speakers that have come have been fantastic. Walz was great. Wes Moore was fantastic. Oprah was great. I mean, we had, I don't know, at least a half dozen plus each night of outstanding speakers. So I think that's been very well put together from that perspective. And I think it's been effective from the standpoint, too, of conveying the energy and excitement that's in the hallway and making sure that the people who are watching, I hope, get that bug as well. So when we get back to wherever we're from next week, we can work to re-energize those efforts, build on the grassroots campaign efforts, the donation efforts, and the like.
I want to ask you about that in just a second, as what is going to be your message to voters in your constituency. But I did want to ask first, because we're recording this right now before Kamala Harris is set to take the stage in just a few hours here in Chicago. So we heard Governor Walz's speech last night. We hear the slogan that's being chanted, "We're not going back," and really a forward message for the Harris campaign. But for you personally, and as a member of Congress, what is it, something policy-wise, that you would want the vice president to touch on with respect to this speech tonight? Because obviously these convention speeches have to be something of a pump up in nature, right? They have to keep people engaged. But this is going to be probably the biggest audience tuning into this. So what are some of the things that you would want the vice president to focus on that maybe you've heard out in your travels in PG County?
Well, I mean, we've had the luxury of having the vice president in Prince George's 3 times this summer. And so I can speak from that. She spoke very strongly about women's right to choose, making sure that abortion rights get fully restored to the point where they were before Roe v. Wade was overturned in the Dobbs decision. And I think we're going to hear quite a bit about that tonight, certainly. Another one was guns. Gun violence is something that's been a problem across the country. Crime overall has gone down, but gun violence is still a huge issue. And, I've got a granddaughter, talking about active shooter drills instead of fire drills, which is what we had when I was in school. That's deeply disturbing. And we've got to make sure we do things to protect kids when they're in school. I understand, people have Second Amendment rights, but we need to make sure we protect those rights, but also protect second graders at the same time. And Governor Walz made that point as well. Kids ought to be able to go to school without being afraid that they might die while they're there. And so I'm sure those points will be hammered on. The week before this, she had a rollout of some of the economic packages that I think they're going to need to continue to roll out and explain to the public, keeping down prescription drug prices. Like, they've already done insulin on that front. They announced 10 more that they're going to work to negotiate those prices down. And those are frequently used drugs that are priced extremely high. And these kinds of cuts would really help people in their pocketbook. $25,000 for first-time home buyers is a big one, I think, too, because really there have been challenges for people, whether it's rent or a mortgage, being able to make sure they can put a roof over their heads and that the kids can do the same. So those are the types of issues I think, we need to make sure they hit on. As Senator Mikulski used to say, there's a lot of macro issues, but we got to make sure we take care of the macaroni and cheese issues too. So I think she'll speak to that tonight, as well as some other factors.
Yeah, I like that slogan. I do want to ask you, this is just because it's not really off of a tangent, but it's kind of what you said about Kamala Harris visiting PG County. You could tell I've been in PG County for a while now. I have some of my friends, as I've nicknamed it PG County, as everybody does. So, but just curious for you, as a Dem who's going out there and championing some of the things policy-wise that the Harris-Walz future administration would champion as well on the campaign trail. You mentioned something about abortion, and I would love for you to answer this question for me, because of the two of us, only one of us is a member of Congress, and that's you, Congressman. So for Dems right now going out there and talking to constituents, talking about women's reproductive rights, should Dems frame it in that regard? It's women's right to choose what to do with their body and women's freedom and their health, as opposed to talking about the A word, which is abortion. And the reason I ask this is because you've seen the talking points from Republican congressmen and women talking about that Democrats want unlimited abortion. They want 9 months and beyond, which we know some of those things are not even true, right? And no doctor would perform some of those things. So I'm just curious for you in terms of the framing, because I know Vice President Harris has been so adamant about this in the last couple of weeks on the campaign trail, talking about a woman's right to choose. But are they framing it properly for those people that could be in that independent lane that are still somehow trying to decide between the two candidates?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair question. And the upside on this, I think, is that it's been winning across the country in ballot initiatives, even in states where people really didn't expect it to happen, like Kansas, for example, and in states that are, pretty red, but more to the center, like Ohio. So I think this is a very strong issue that people across the country want to make sure that whether we use the A word and, talk about abortions, talk about women's right to choose, talk about restoring Roe or codifying Roe, protecting women's rights to make the decisions about what happens to their bodies. And that's between them and their doctors and their families, and not Donald Trump and members of the government. I think all of those make sense and seem to resonate with the public. The bottom line, though, is I think, we've got states where they've essentially repealed women's rights to get abortions, even if they're rape or incest survivors. And in some instances, because they're criminalizing abortions, doctors are afraid to perform any kind of activity, even if it isn't exactly an abortion, because they're worried about criminal prosecution. So you've seen scenarios where they've told women, go out and wait in your car till you get sicker, and then maybe I can take care of you. That's crazy. And so I think we need to make sure that we protect women. They shouldn't have to, going through those kinds of situations. It just makes sense for them to have the rights that they had under Roe v. Wade. And I think we need to restore those. Whatever rubric we use, we need to get those rights back in place.
So let me ask you about something else that I've noticed a trend on. I got asked about this recently on a political panel. Is about the amount of Republicans that have been attending the DNC. You had the mayor of Mesa, Arizona, my buddy Jeff Duncan, the former lieutenant governor in Georgia, another friend, Olivia Troy, who was an advisor to Vice President Pence. The two of them spoke last night, those last two, and then Mesa spoke 2 days ago at the convention. And all of them have kind of echoed this same thing about not being able to recognize their party. There's been some jokes about, I think I'm lost here, coming over here. So what do you make of, look, I think there's the Captain Obvious answer in terms of that the party is now beholden to one particular person, and he's kind of weeded out the classic traditional Republicans that are more conservative in nature, and just the government just shouldn't be spending things and we should be cutting the budget a little bit more. And now they're finding their way into the DNC and making speeches, which you probably would never have seen 20, 30 years ago. What do you make of this growing trend, or is it a growing trend? You can tell me, you're on the ground there in Chicago, of Republicans that are maybe finding a little bit more comfort in speaking on the Democratic platform.
I mean, I think it's a great question. I think there's a lot of Republicans, traditional Republicans, I'll call them, who are totally uncomfortable with Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and the direction they're taking the Republican Party and the direction they want to take America for a variety of reasons. But, if you notice during the Republican convention, neither Bush was, Bush 2 wasn't there. Romney wasn't there. Anybody related to the McCain era wasn't there. They've got all these former presidents. None of them were at the convention. And, his vice president, Pence, wasn't there and isn't even going to support Donald Trump. So it's a real eye opener, I think, especially from, members of his cabinet who are not going to support him. Former Defense Secretary Esper, for example. When you have people like that who are saying, this guy's gone too far for me to support, he's putting the country at risk, that's a strong message, I think, to voters, especially independent voters, swing voters who might be still thinking about what decision they want to make. When you see people like that making those kinds of decisions and taking those kinds of positions because they're worried about the safety of our democracy and the future of our democracy if Donald Trump gets elected, I think that's a powerful message that should help the Democrats build even a stronger and broader coalition as we head into November.
All right, Congressman. Now let's get to the big question of what I have prepared for you here. So you're in Chicago there with your staff, and you run into, let's say you run into Vice President Harris. She says, "Congressman, good to see you. You got any advice for me over these next couple of weeks here as I hit the campaign trail?" You heard Wes Moore yesterday say early voting. We got 75 days, I think he said in his speech last night. So she's asking for advice, and these are things that Democrats are going to be unified in terms of going out there talking to constituents and voters about issues wise. We've touched on a lot of it here, but what would you say to her in that position of what should be our unifying message going forward and carrying us through November?
Well, I think she needs to stay the course. I mean, this is a moment where, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The campaign rallies that she's been having have been spectacular. The speeches she's been giving have been very powerful and persuasive and emotional. I think voters are energized. We've got volunteers coming out of the woodwork who want to try and help, and that's going to be great for our ground game. Donors are back on board as well. So I don't know that she needs any kind of change in course. I know there are people pushing her to do different things here, there, or the other, media in particular. But I think she needs to just keep listening to the base and the voters that might vote for her and support her in November. And I couldn't write it any better so far. This what is it, 3-4 weeks now? If this had been an episode of The West Wing, I think people wouldn't believe that it was this powerful and perfect, frankly. So we just need to stay the course, make sure we don't get overconfident, and try and make sure we keep pushing so that the excitement doesn't run out and we sprint through the tape.
You're right. I don't think Aaron Sorkin could have written this type of script for sure. That's for sure. Congressman Glenn Ivey, Maryland's 4th District, all my people out there in PG County, out in Largo, say hello to the congressman when you can. You can check him out wherever. Go to ivy.house.gov and find out more about him. I know you'll be watching tonight and the speeches. Safe travels for you as you're heading back to Maryland County area there. And thank you for coming on the program as always.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.